Välkommen till Flipdays podcast. Podden för dig som är intresserad av entreprenörskap, investeringar och crowdfunding av framtidsföretag. Jag heter Niklas Aldén och det här är Flipday. Crowdfunding som koncept har faktiskt en längre historia än vad många tror. För över 100 år sedan crowdfundade man böcker genom att låta människor anmäla intresse i förväg. Och fick man tillräckligt med intressenter, eller backare i dagens termer, så fick författaren pengar från förlaget för att skriva boken. Vår tids crowdfunding funkar på ett liknande sätt och marknaden domineras idag av sajter som Indiegogo och Kickstarter. Men det finns fler typer av crowdfunding än den så kallade reward-based crowdfunding som många associerar crowdfunding med idag. Reward-based crowdfunding, eller belöningsdriven på svenska, är egentligen inte mer än en form av förköp där du anmäler intresse för en produkt innan den har skapats. Men crowdfunding-modellen kan utnyttjas till så mycket mer. Och ett av de mest intressanta områdena är det vi ska prata om idag, nämligen equity crowdfunding. I equity crowdfunding blir en backare delägare i ett företag. Och det är ett sätt för privata investerare att kunna exponera sig mot onoterade företag samtidigt som entreprenörerna kan nå ut till en helt annan typ av investerare än traditionella riskkapitalbolag eller affärsänglar. I dagens intervju träffar vi Nathan Rose från Nya Zeeland som är expert på equity crowdfunding. 2015 avslutade han sin karriär som investmentbanker för att satsa på att starta Assemble Advisory, som idag är en världsledande byrå för equity crowdfunding och som hjälpt entreprenörer världen över att resa över $11 miljoner i kapital. Dessutom har han skrivit boken Equity Crowdfunding, The Complete Guide for Startups and Growing Companies, där han delar med sig av sin expertis i området. Vi diskuterar konceptet Equity Crowdfunding, varför det kan vara ett bra alternativ för din startup och hur man lyckas med en crowdfunding-kampanj. Ni lyssnar på Flipdays podcast. Welcome to the show, Nathan. Could you tell us about your background?
Sure. So my name's Nathan Rose, and I'm the founder of Assemble Advisory, which is a agency for helping startups and growing companies do equity crowdfunding platforms. I come from New Zealand, and over the last couple of years, I've travelled around the world to figure out equity crowdfunding, and the end result was a book that I published in November last year.
So how is the startup scene in New Zealand?
New Zealand has got a thriving startup scene, actually. There's an awareness, I think, in a small place like here that we need to look beyond our own country. So a lot of very innovative technology startups and also in the food and beverage sector as well. Everyone knows that New Zealand has a lot of sheep, for example, and has also very good wine. So we tend to have startups that are world leading in those areas as well.
So how did you get into equity crowdfunding and how did Assemble Advisory take form?
So before I started my own business, I was an investment banker, which we would help out companies looking to do initial public offerings. And when equity crowdfunding came along, I saw that this is really quite similar to initial public offerings. It's an offer of shares to the public. And there was a need for startups at an earlier stage to get the same kind of advice around how to come up with a sensible valuation for their company and market and promote it, but to do so through crowdfunding. So they couldn't afford the big expensive investment bank with the big offices in the middle of the city. So I started my business while I was traveling through Europe, and it started out being actually just something that I was doing on the side to earn a little money while I was traveling. But what I found is that there's so much demand out there for it that it's become a full-time thing now.
So if we get into the equity crowdfunding, for those who don't know, what is equity crowdfunding?
Yeah, so a lot of people will know what crowdfunding is. They've seen sites like Kickstarter and Indiegogo where you can get small amounts of money from lots of different people, which together can add up to big amounts of money using the internet. So equity crowdfunding is pretty similar to Kickstarter in that you get the money from the internet, but instead of offering a t-shirt or a pre-ordered product or just being a donation, the people who put the money into your business actually become shareholders in the company, which means that if the company were to eventually do well and get sold, they would stand to profit. So the example I always use is Oculus Rift. So Oculus Rift, they're the virtual reality headset that funded on Kickstarter many years ago, and they did very well. They raised a couple of $1 million, and everyone who backed their crowdfunding campaign got their virtual reality headset. But later on, when the Oculus Rift was sold, a huge deal, they the people who put the money in, if it had been equity crowdfunding, would have shared in that big gain, but instead they just have a headset. So the fact that you become shareholders is a small difference, but a very important one.
So if you look at a site like Kickstarter, that would be considered reward-based crowdfunding, right?
That's right.
And then there's also debt-based crowdfunding. And what do you think in equity crowdfunding, do successful campaigns, do they give out rewards as well? Would you say that's important?
Some of them do. I'd say it's not essential, but it can help. I think in equity crowdfunding, most of the time people are looking at it purely from whether the business case stacks up. And because of that, they're putting in much larger amounts sometimes. Like in Kickstarter, for example, if you have a wine company and you use Kickstarter, you can sell people a bottle of wine, you can sell people 10 bottles of wine, maybe you can sell them 50 bottles of wine, but it's hard to really justify being able to take $20,000 or $50,000 off somebody. But in equity crowdfunding, if this is a wealthy person who's building an investment portfolio, then these larger amounts from a single person can be possible. But yeah, sure, rewards can help as well. Like it can help if you have a consumer brand to give people a trial of your product. It can help them to spread the word and make them more loyal. And, at the margin, maybe it convinces some people who are on the fence to jump over the line and invest.
And what would you say is the most common misconceptions around equity crowdfunding?
The most common misconception is that the crowdfunding platform has the audience that's going to get you all the money that you need. And I think this is true of rewards crowdfunding too, that people will put together their offer information, put it online, and then wait for the internet to throw them money. And it never works like that. You've got to do the work yourself to generate the momentum with a full marketing campaign, a full outreach campaign to drive that money to your offer page rather than wait for it to somehow naturally come. I guess that's what I help with, and at Assemble Advisory is helping people use the resources that they have, whether that's an email list or a social media following or personal connections, and leverage that into an investment round.
So would you say that being successful at equity crowdfunding takes a lot more marketing skills, basically, compared to having maybe angel investors or VCs?
Yeah, that's definitely true. It's a marketing exercise when you're trying to reach a lot of people with anything, whether that's a product launch or whether it's doing a crowdfunding campaign. When you're doing, I think it's a different exercise. When you're doing an angel VC round, it's still marketing in some way because you're still trying to promote yourself, but you're trying to promote yourself to one person. So you're going to be doing different things, like you're going to be researching that one person, finding out what they've already invested in. Whereas with equity crowdfunding, because you're going out there to a much larger number of people, you've got to come up with like a more a broad message and give people enough information that every person who's putting $100 in doesn't need to talk to you personally. But yeah, it's different marketing, but I think it is probably more work overall.
What are the biggest opportunities? Why would you go into equity crowdfunding?
Well, if we just assume for a moment that a business needs the money, there are different ways to do that. So yeah, you can do a Kickstarter campaign. The problem with that is, as I've mentioned, it's hard to raise a large amount of money with that. There is always examples of companies that have raised hundreds of thousands or millions of euros with rewards crowdfunding, but they're very few and far between. A more typical number is maybe a few $1,000s, which for most businesses isn't going to get them very far. Compared to angels and VCs, it's the ability to do this promotion to a large number of people and raise money at the same time, which I think is so interesting. Plus, you can often get the money you need at better terms than angel investors and VCs have been traditionally giving it out for. I mean, when you're dealing with a venture capitalist, they know a lot more about valuation than you do, and they've been through the process a lot more times. But when you do crowdfunding as the entrepreneur, you have a lot more control. You can set your own terms and put them out to the crowd, and because there's thousands and thousands of people that you're talking to, you might have a better chance of finding people who are more willing to back your company on the terms that are more acceptable to you.
But wouldn't that be considered a risk as well, if we look at it from the investor side?
Yeah, sure. It's definitely a risky space. The investors need to be careful, but there needs to be a balance, I think. I mean, you shouldn't have entrepreneurs who just set whatever crazy terms they like and start a business at a very early stage and value it at 10 million euros or something. That's not right. But I also don't think it's right that an entrepreneur who's worked really hard to build up a strong company gets a lot of it just taken away from them under their nose by a smart venture capitalist who has a good lawyer. There's a middle ground there somewhere, and I think crowdfunding can help all of us find it.
Some investors are considered smart money, that they could actually help with their networks and knowledge. And is there any risk for the entrepreneurs that they're taking in maybe inexperienced investors? Maybe also a problem with the volume, the amount of investors?
I think the amount of investors is not really a concern, because there are smart ways to manage this. Like, let's say you get 100 investors on board. Some of them will be larger and demand more of your attention, and some of them will be very small. What you can do is you can group them all together in a legal structure which helps you to manage them all. And if you ever sold the business down the line, it would help to get all those investors along when you sell the business. In terms of the risk of inexperienced investors, I mean, there are a lot of disclosure statements all through the crowdfunding platforms which state that investing in startups is risky. And let's not shy away from that. It's definitely can be a risky thing. But there's also opportunity there. So I think as long as people are, they're not investing more than they can afford, and they are doing so for the right reasons after carefully considering the offer, then I think it provides a new asset class that people haven't had access to before.
And how would you say the valuations differ? Are they more favorable for the investors in general or for the entrepreneurs?
I think in equity crowdfunding, it's more favorable for the entrepreneurs than would be the case in venture capital. And the reason for that is that the power dynamic is more in the entrepreneur's favor when you can market to many people at the same time.
If you look at reward-based crowdfunding, I get the feeling that the space is pretty crowded, no pun intended. Is equity crowdfunding something that is not as common these days? Is it easier to stand out as a company?
Yeah, so when you look at a rewards crowdfunding platform like Kickstarter, there are thousands and thousands of offers online at one time. So it's very hard for your offer to get to the front page. But with equity crowdfunding, because the platforms are choosing the startups to work with, there's usually maybe a handful of companies online at a time. So there might be a dozen, let's say, if it's a large platform. Some of the really large platforms in the UK might have more than that. But when you're one of, let's say, 12 instead of one of thousands and thousands, then you can be on the front page, and as anyone who's ever done any search engine optimization would know, being on the front page of the search engine is important, and the same with crowdfunding. You want to be on the front page of their website too, so you get the benefit of their traffic seeing your offer and getting the chance to click on it and check it out.
And how has the growth been in interest from investors?
I think it's been very strong in general. There've been a few different waves of interest in it. So the first wave came when it was totally new and people were wondering, what is this new thing? And let's try it out. And then I think a lot of people were expecting that it was going to be a flash in the pan and to just disappear. But when it stayed around and more and more startups wanted to use it, and there were more and more investors coming to do it too. Then a second wave of interest came through, and that's only going to be sustained, I think, when you can also start to see some of the money not only going into equity crowdfunding, but also coming out of it. So when you fund a company, you fund it because you expect that it'll eventually get sold and you make a profit when it gets sold. What we're starting to see now, especially towards the end of last year, we're starting to see more and more exits happen. So when the success stories come through of people having invested in a crowdfunded company and making a profit from it, that's when the extra interest comes in, because all of a sudden it's real now. It's not something that might happen in theory. We're still waiting, I think, for a really big success story to come, to hear of someone who's made thousands and thousands times their money. I can pick the next Facebook or the next Google, but it's possible. In time, we might see it.
Yeah, I guess that would be the real driving point to see if people are starting to get rich by this, then that would attract a lot of investors. But what are some typical exit scenarios for an investor?
There's usually two. That's a sale of the business to a trade buyer, or a sale of the business to a financial investor. So a trade buyer is someone else in the industry, like it might be a competitor, or it might be one of your suppliers decides to buy you out. Or a financial investor is someone like a VC or an angel investor who after you've crowdfunded and you've taken the time to achieve your milestones, they see it and they think you've got a good business, and then they buy you out. I mean, there's also the possibility, the third option is an initial public offering, but that's pretty rare, and it tends to happen at a much later stage. So the more usual thing for a crowdfunded company to expect is for someone to simply come along and buy the company.
When could you expect maybe to see some return on your investment?
Yeah, I think this is a really important thing for investors to understand, is that there is no specific time limit as to when you'll get your money back. And you look at any type of asset and there's pluses and minuses. You invest in real estate, the pluses is that it's something tangible and you can sell it at any time. The thing with equity crowdfunding and investing in startups in general, the plus is that you can have a business which increases in value by 100 times. But the downside is you don't know when that 100 times money is going to come to you, and it's going to be very difficult to sell if you suddenly need the money. So it's not liquid. Having said that, you asked what's typical. I mean, I'd say a range of perhaps maybe between 3 years and 8 years is perhaps normal. And this is one of the reasons we haven't seen a lot of exits from equity crowdfunding yet, is that the industry has only really been going for about 5 years. So a lot of companies are still waiting that time to get themselves to a point where a financial buyer or a trade buyer will be interested. I think that the thing for investors to really have in their mind is that if you're investing in these companies, you've stayed invested in them until the company is sold. So the money that you put in shouldn't be money that you're later going to need for something else. Yeah, there might be over-the-counter markets pop up that make it possible at the margin, but I don't think it'll be very easy to do, and I don't think you'll see much ability to do it for just any company that you want.
So let's get into the really big question. What makes a successful crowdfunding campaign?
The big question. The thing that makes it successful is, well, there are certain things which are very simple but not easy to do, which are you've got to have a great company. If you've just got an idea, or you've just got a company which isn't doing so well and you want to raise money for it, and you're hoping that equity crowdfunding is going to allow you to do that, then that's going to be really difficult. So as long as you've got actually a good company that is worthy of investment, the things that will require it are, I think, number one, a focus on the process. So don't try to do it at the same time as a major product launch, or if you've got some crazy staff changes going on in your startup, you want to give it your full focus, because it'll probably take about 2 or 3 months, and it's an opportunity to get your company out there, to raise a lot of money and to build your profile. So try to give as much resource to it as possible. you've got to be, you've got to put your ego aside when you're asking people for money. So you've got to be able to tap every channel, and that includes friends and family. It includes social media, hitting your email list, even cold calling potential investors. You've got to be willing to hustle and get out there and drive that momentum. And once you've got that momentum, this is the other really key thing, is once you've got that momentum, then the audience that the platform has built up can start to come to the fore. So these crowdfunding platforms have built up their own audience of investors, which, as I said at the start, when you asked me what the biggest mistake was, is that people rely on that too much. But if you can generate that initial momentum through your own networks, get that initial money come through, and as soon as your offer goes live, people see that you've already got, say, 50% of your offer committed, then the platform's the platform's audience will become interested and start to invest their own money too. So first of all, you've got to generate the momentum with your networks, then the platform's audience will come through.
So that sounds a lot like reward-based crowdfunding, because they also talk a lot about getting the momentum, like you need to have a certain percentage of the money already in maybe the first 24 hours. But is the quality of the company, is that something you take in consideration too when you get clients?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you only want to be able to work with people that you can actually help. There's no point to... because people ultimately want the funds in their bank account. So you only want to work with people who you think have a realistic chance of being able to do that. So what the first thing I'll usually do with a person is we'll have a call where I'll look at where they are in their business, how much money they need, and whether it's a realistic thing for them to do at all. And sometimes the answer is no. And then we both go our separate ways, and I think that's fine. If you can save people a lot of time by pursuing something that they've never had a chance with, then that can be valuable too.
Are there any good examples of successful and unsuccessful campaigns that you've seen? Yeah,
well, in my book I talked to 20 campaigns actually, so there are a lot of success stories out there. And there's even one in the book that they ran a successful campaign and then later they ran a failed campaign, so they got to see both sides of it. So to choose a successful campaign, I'll go with Monzo, which is a UK-based smartphone bank. So they don't have branches, they don't have physical offices, just everything's done through the internet and through the smartphone. And they were able to raise £1 million British in just 96 seconds, which is definitely a record. When you think that most campaigns go for a month or maybe even 2 months, they were able to do it that quickly. And that was, again, just because of the user base that they'd built up, and they were able to really energize their user base towards the launch of their campaign, and they had everyone online, like hitting refresh on their browser, waiting for the offer to go live. And when they did, of course, everyone invested as quickly as they could. I mean, the other thing they did very well was they actually had some angel investors already, so the crowd could follow what the smart money investors had already done. This is another great way to generate momentum. As for failed campaigns, the example in the book is Winner Takes All Gaming. So they had an online lottery platform. So the reason that they were unsuccessful the second time around was they relied on their own networks too much. So when I say that, they were basically asking their friends and family for money, but they weren't going too far beyond that. So they were trying to do a lot in their business at the same time, which I already mentioned is one of the big mistakes that you can do. So they couldn't give crowdfunding their full focus. They were just asking their friends and family for the money, and they weren't doing enough on the external marketing. And as a result, their campaign failed, and the company went out of business. So, yeah, it's tough, in the startup world that these sorts of things can happen. But perhaps this is one of the risks too of equity crowdfunding, that if you fail with an angel investor, then that's okay, because that's kept within the walls of the room that failure took place. But when you fail with equity crowdfunding, everyone in the world can see it, and That's a tough thing to deal with for a startup that's trying to raise money, to have a failed campaign. So you get one chance, and it's best to do it right the first time.
And in your book, you also mentioned some examples from Sweden. Could you tell us about those?
Yeah, there was one called Natural Box, and they do delivered vegan food and cosmetics. So the founder of that, Alicia Schlebner, she was very successful in getting investors from all around the world to invest in her company. And one of the reasons that she did it, instead of going to angels or venture capital, was that she just felt that she wouldn't work so well with these kinds of angel and VC type of people. And in the book I talk about this, that there's a certain type of person that often VC is, and it's often a middle-aged white person who's been to an elite university, probably a man. And if you think of Alicia's type of business, which is doing very green and very healthy, very earthy kinds of food and cosmetics, you can imagine that a person like her probably doesn't work so well with a VC. They're just different people, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with either type of person. But if you don't get on well with the VC type of person, until now you haven't really been able to raise money because they're the ones with the money. But when you can go out to the crowd, you can keep more of your company's culture, and that's what Natural Box are able to do.
That's a really great point. If we look at it at the investor's point of view and look at some of the risks, what would you say the biggest risks are for an investor, and also maybe the benefits as well?
Well, the biggest risk is that you put money into a company and all the money just disappears and you never get it back. This is the thing with crowdfunding, that the rewards are big if you can pick the next big winner, but there is a very good chance that startup businesses don't succeed. Like, there's some statistic that a lot of companies fail in their first year, and slightly less fail in their second year, and slightly less and less and less fail in every year after that. So if you're going to invest in companies at the very early stage, then you've got to accept that there's a high chance of risk there. But the big opportunity is that they are also the types of companies which can increase in value very rapidly if they can get traction, which I don't think you can get in the stock market, really. Like, it's very, very difficult to invest in a company which will increase in value by 20 times or 50 times. Even if you invested in Facebook at their initial public offering, they've, I think, only doubled in value since the initial public offering. But if you were Peter Thiel and you got into Facebook right at the start of 2004, then the number that you have increased your money by, it's a very, very big number. I think it's tens of thousands of times as money he made. So this allows the opportunity for ordinary investors who've never had access to this before to invest like Peter Thiel does. And even better than that, they can look at guys like Peter Thiel, what they're investing their money in, and then they can follow that and invest on the same terms. That's the exciting thing about crowdfunding.
So it's a common equation that more risk equals more reward, or worse losses, of course.
The two can sometimes come together. I always, every time I hear that, though, that risk always comes with reward, I always stop people at that, though, because I think you can just be taking a risk with no possibility of reward. So you've got to be careful.
That's true.
And you can also be rewarded with very little risk if you just do the right things.
Yeah.
If you're investing in startup companies, they are risky, but the rewards can be there for sure.
And lastly, what would you recommend our listeners who are interested in either investing in startups or raising capital, maybe in equity crowdfunding?
I'll give two answers. The first one is to, of course, buy my book. got to get that in there. But apart from that, there's a lot of information out there now. If you just jump onto Google, like perhaps just type in Swedish equity crowdfunding and see some results. Start reading some articles. Start looking at some campaigns and reading about the types of companies that are there. You can see the past companies that have done crowdfunding, what sort of stage they're at, the sort of money they've been able to raise. You can look at their video. You can look at the type of commentary they're putting up there. So you can start to form a sense of whether for your startup, whatever it is, whether there's companies like that have done it in the past, and you can start to look at some of the platforms out there, see which ones are the more successful ones or the bigger audience, and and go from there, and like explore all the alternatives. Like if you really need funding, then there's a lot of options out there to you. But I think crowdfunding can be a great one to raise money, to deepen the loyalty of your customer base, and to promote yourself all at the same time.
Great. And the book is available at Equity Crowdfunding, The Complete Guide for Startups and Growing Companies. It's available on Amazon, right? And as an ebook as well?
That's right, in Kindle or in paperback form. Yep.
Perfect. And can anyone contact Assemble Advisory?
They sure can. My website is assembleadvisory.com, or they can feel free to shoot me an email, which is nathan@assembleadvisory.com.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicholas. It's been great.
Vi riktar ett stort tack till Nathan som ville medverka i Flipdays podd hela vägen från Nya Zeeland. Vill du veta mer om Nathan eller hans Assemble Advisory kan du gå in på assembleadvisory.com och glöm heller inte läsa boken Equity Crowdfunding, The Complete Guide for Startups and Growing Companies som finns från de flesta stora bokhandlar. Tills nästa gång får ni gärna prenumerera på podden och lämna recension på iTunes om ni inte redan gjort det. Ni kan läsa mer om podden och Flipday och våran Equity Crowdfunding-sajt på flipday.nu. Tack för att du har lyssnat.